Richard Thorne believed his son-in-law was a failure. A pleasant, forgettable man named Liam who occupied space at the family table like a piece of furniture nobody quite remembered buying. He didn't know that the failure standing before him, looking utterly unshaken by his condescending glare, owned the very building they were celebrating tonight. Within 3 short hours, that simple, unassailable fact would detonate in the center of Richard's carefully curated world, and the resulting shockwave would dismantle his entire legacy, brick by gilded brick. The man he dismissed as a junior draftsman was, in reality, the architect of his ruin. We've all felt underestimated, haven't we? That sting of being judged on the surface while knowing the vast, unseen depths of our own capabilities. It's a universal frustration. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from as we dive into this story of quiet strength and explosive truth. And if you enjoy stories where karma isn't just a concept, but a beautifully executed blueprint, you'll want to subscribe, because the foundation for justice is being laid right now. The day of the gala had begun not with a bang, but with a familiar, corrosive whisper of contempt. Liam stood in the cool, minimalist expanse of the master bedroom, a space designed to look like a magazine spread, but that had long felt like a sterile hotel suite. Chloe, his wife, was a whirlwind of silk and scent, her reflection multiplying in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. She held up a shimmering, emerald-green dress against her body, her eyes assessing her own form with critical satisfaction. "Don't wait up for me tonight, Liam," she said, her voice casual, almost an afterthought. The words were not a request, but a decree. The Sterling Tower Gala is going to be a late one. It's crucial for networking. Liam finished buttoning his simple, well-pressed work shirt. He knew about the gala. He'd had the invitation on his desk for 6 months. Not the generic corporate one Chloe had received, but the one reserved for the guest of honor. "I was planning on going," he said, his voice even, betraying none of the cold not tightening in his stomach. Chloe finally turned from her reflection, an expression of weary exasperation on her perfectly made-up face. It was a look he knew well, one that positioned him as a burden, a complication she was forced to manage. "Oh, Liam, don't be difficult. This is a work thing. It's for high-level executives, major partners. You'd be out of place. You wouldn't know anyone. I work for the company," he reminded her gently. "I'm a draftsman at Thorne Consolidated." She sighed, a theatrical exhalation of impatience. "Exactly. A draftsman. This isn't the company picnic. This is for the people who actually matter, the ones who built the tower." She gestured vaguely, as if the very concept of his attendance was exhausting. "Besides, Mark is taking me. He needs a partner who can navigate these rooms, someone who adds to his presence, not detracts from it." Mark, his boss, the senior project manager who treated Liam with a blend of paternalistic scorn and outright dismissal. The man whose cologne sometimes lingered on Chloe's clothes when she came home late from work dinners. The mention of his name was the final, deliberate twist of the knife. She wasn't just excluding him. She was replacing him with his own superior, a public declaration of Liam's inadequacy in every sphere of his life. "I see," Liam said. The 2 words were calm, measured, a placid lake over a churning abyss. He saw everything. He saw the affair she barely bothered to hide. He saw the social calculation, the cold ambition that had long ago extinguished any warmth she might have felt for him. He saw the casual cruelty of it all. "Good. I'm glad you understand," she said, relieved, turning back to the mirror. She mistook his stillness for surrender. It was a mistake she, her lover, and her father had been making for 5 years. They saw a quiet man and assumed he was a weak one. They saw his patience and mistook it for a lack of ambition. They had never once considered that his silence was not empty, but full. It was full of observation, of planning, of the slow, meticulous construction of a new reality they couldn't even imagine. He walked over to his side of the closet. Tucked away behind his modest collection of work shirts and sensible sweaters was a garment bag made of heavy, breathable canvas. He ran his hand over it, the fine fabric a stark contrast to the off-the-rack clothes she saw him in every day. Inside was a suit, bespoke and hand-stitched by a tailor in Seville Row, commissioned a year ago for this very night. The cost of the suit alone was more than the salary Mark thought he earned in 3 months. Chloe, now applying her lipstick with surgical precision, spoke to his reflection. Just have some dinner, watch a movie. Don't do anything exciting. It was a final jab, a little joke at the expense of his supposedly dull existence. I won't, he promised. And he meant it. What he was about to do wasn't exciting. It was methodical. It was necessary. It was the final, load-bearing column being slotted into a grand design years in the making. He looked at his wife, so radiant and confident in her ignorance. A beautiful stranger preparing for a party, celebrating a man she thought she knew, in a building she had no idea he owned. A flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or the ghost of a love long dead, passed through him. It was a fleeting weakness. He let it go. Tonight, the architecture of their lives was about to be redrawn, and he was the only one holding the blueprints. He slid a small, heavy object into his pocket. It was a key fob fashioned from brushed titanium and smooth, dark walnut. It looked elegant, understated. To Chloe, it would have looked like a trinket for a fancy car. She had no idea it was the master key to her father's entire world. The humiliation was not a new phenomenon. It was the very climate of his marriage. It had escalated slowly, insidiously, over the 5 years since he had married into the Thorne dynasty. At first, it was subtle. Little jokes from his father-in-law, Richard, at family dinners about his artistic temperament, backhanded compliments from his mother-in-law, Eleanor, about how refreshing it was that Liam wasn't obsessed with money and status like everyone else in their circle. These were paper cuts, small wounds that barely bled but stung with the poison of condescension. He remembered one Christmas, 2 years into the marriage. The family was gathered in the Thornes' palatial living room, a cavernous space decorated with punishingly good taste. A fire roared in a marble fireplace the size of a small car. Liam had just quit a promising position at a mid-size architectural firm to, as he'd told them, go freelance and focus on his own design philosophy. In reality, he had just secured the seed funding to launch his own firm, Ethelred Designs, under a cloak of absolute anonymity. He needed to be small to move fast, to be underestimated, so no one would see him coming. Richard, swirling a brandy snifter, had fixed him with a look of amused pity. Freelance, Liam? That's a brave choice. A bit like deciding to be a poet, isn't it? Noble, but hardly a way to support my daughter in the manner to which she is accustomed. The room fell silent. Chloe, seated beside him on a cream-colored sofa, didn't defend him. She gave a small, tight smile and patted his hand, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but felt like a public consolation prize. Liam has to follow his passion, Daddy. We'll manage, the we'll manage was the most insulting part, implying a future of shared hardship brought on by his foolish, artistic whim. Liam had simply nodded. It's a long-term project, he'd said, his voice calm. But I believe in it. Richard had laughed, a booming sound that filled the room. Well, as long as you believe in it. In the meantime, I've had a word with HR at Thorne Consolidated. There's a spot for you in the drafting department. Stable work. Aprupe paishik. It's important to have a safety net when your passions don't pay the bills. It was an offer he couldn't refuse without causing a family war. He had accepted, stepping into the role of the charity case, the son-in-law, given a menial job out of pity. He became a junior draftsman in the company that was, ironically, one of his own firm's biggest competitors. It was the perfect cover. No one looks for a king in the mailroom. No one expects the man fetching coffee to one day own the castle. Now, in the sanctuary of his real office, the humiliation of that memory felt distant, like an echo from another life. This space was his truth. It was a converted warehouse loft in a part of the city the Thornes would never visit. Exposed brick walls were lined with shelves of architectural theory and philosophy. A massive oak table was covered in blueprints for a new sustainable urban development in Singapore. The air smelled of coffee, old paper, and possibility. This was the headquarters of Ethelred Designs, a firm that had, in 3 short years, become the most talked about, enigmatic force in modern architecture. They were known for their brilliant, innovative designs and their obsessive secrecy. No one knew who was behind it. The name Ethelred itself was a private joke, an Old English name meaning noble counsel, a nod to the fact that his designs were his only true advisors. His phone buzzed, displaying a name, Arthur Sterling. Liam answered, leaning back in his worn leather chair. "Arthur, how are you?" The voice on the other end was warm and patrician. "Liam, my boy. Better, now that I'm about to see your masterpiece unveiled. Are you ready for your coming-out party?" Liam smiled. Arthur Sterling was a titan of industry, a man whose net worth was a rounding error away from the GDP of a small country. He was also Ethelred's first and most important client, a man who had bet on Liam's anonymous portfolio and won spectacularly. "I'm not sure anyone is ready for it, Arthur, least of all our host. Richard Thorne is a pompous fool," Sterling said without malice, stating it as a fact. "He was weeks from defaulting on the tower's financing when your anonymous bid came through and saved his hide. He thinks he was bailed out by some faceless Swiss fund. The irony is delicious. Arthur had been the one to discreetly facilitate the deal, ensuring Liam's ownership stake and creative control remained ironclad and utterly hidden. He values appearances above all else," Liam said, looking at a framed photo on his desk. It was of him and Chloe on their wedding day. They looked happy, or at least like a perfect imitation of it. "Tonight, he'll have to confront reality." "And his daughter?" Sterling asked, his voice softening slightly. "This will be difficult for her." The smile faded from Liam's face. "She made her choices, Arthur. She chose the appearance of strength over the real thing." "I'm just holding up a mirror." "A very expensive, very tall mirror," Sterling chuckled. "I'll see you at 7. My car will be waiting for you downstairs at 6:30. And Liam? Wear the good suit. It's time the world saw the man, not the shadow." "I will," Liam said. "Thank you, Arthur." He hung up and looked around his office. This was his creation, his passion. The world Richard Thorne had tried to force him into, the small, beige world of the junior draftsman, was the shadow. This was the substance. For years, he had lived a dual life, enduring the casual cruelties of the Thorns by day and building an empire by night. He had swallowed their insults, absorbed their pity, and used it all as fuel. He had let them draw their own conclusions, build their own caricature of him. Tonight, he wasn't just going to a party. He was going to burn that caricature to the ground. And from the ashes, the real Liam would finally stand up. The day of the gala unfolded with a deceptive calm, a deep breath before the plunge. While Chloe was at the salon, then at a fitting, then caught in a flurry of self-important preparations, Liam followed a quiet, deliberate ritual of his own. He spent the morning at his firm's office, the converted loft, finalizing the last details of the evening not with an event planner, but with his legal team. Contracts were reviewed, ownership documents were printed and sealed in a heavy leather portfolio, and digital access protocols for the Sterling Tower were transferred to his personal devices. Every contingency was planned for, every possible reaction from the Thorne family anticipated and mapped out like a strategic chess game. By early afternoon, he was back at the house he still shared with Chloe. It was her house, really a wedding gift from her parents. It was a monument to their taste, cold, modern, and impersonal, filled with art chosen by a decorator and books that had never been opened. He walked through the silent rooms, a ghost in his own life. He felt a profound sense of detachment, not a sadness. He was merely an observer cataloging the end of an era. The life he had lived here, the man he had pretended to be, was already a relic of the past. At 5 o'clock, he went to the master closet. He pushed past his own section of sensible, boring clothes, the camouflage he wore every day. He retrieved the heavy canvas garment bag that had been delivered by courier from London months ago. He laid it on the vast, empty bed and unzipped it. The suit was a masterpiece of midnight blue wool, so dark it was almost black. The cut was modern, sharp, but with a timeless elegance. He laid out a crisp white shirt, a silk tie the color of silver, and a pair of handmade leather shoes from Florentine artisan. This was his armor. Not the armor of a warrior, but of a creator, a man whose power lay not in aggression, but in vision. As he showered and shaved, he thought about the car. It was an indulgence, but a necessary one. A piece of theater. Months ago, he had tasked one of his agents with finding the perfect 1964 Aston Martin DB5 in silver birch, the exact car Chloe had a poster of in her college dorm room. She used to talk about it endlessly, a symbol of a life of glamour and adventure she craved. It had been found in a private collection in Italy, purchased discreetly, and shipped to a private restoration specialist in California. It had arrived in the city a week ago, housed in a climate-controlled private garage downtown, a place where billionaires kept their weekend toys hidden from public view. It was the ultimate symbolic gesture. He would arrive at the gala not just as himself, but as the living embodiment of the dream she thought he could never give her. A dream he had achieved without her, in spite of her. Dressed, he stood before the mirror. The man looking back at him was not the person Chloe thought she knew. The suit fit him perfectly, accentuating a confidence he had always possessed but kept carefully concealed. There was a stillness in his eyes, a clarity of purpose. He was not nervous. He was ready. He picked up the heavy leather portfolio from his desk and the sleek titanium key fob. He walked out of the bedroom, leaving no note, no explanation. His actions tonight would be his closing statement. The private garage was a hushed, cathedral-like space of polished concrete and soft, recessed lighting. His Aston Martin was waiting for him, gleaming under a single spotlight. It was breathtaking, a piece of rolling sculpture. The attendant, a man accustomed to seeing every imaginable exotic car, simply nodded with deep respect. Liam slid into the driver's seat. The smell of rich leather and old machinery filled his senses. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life with a deep, throaty growl. It was the sound of power, held in reserve but ready to be unleashed. He drove through the city as dusk settled, the sky turning a bruised purple and orange. The city lights began to glitter, reflected in the car's immaculate paintwork. People on the sidewalks stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of awe and envy. He drove not with speed, but with a deliberate, unhurried grace. He was in no rush. The evening would unfold on his timetable. He was not a guest arriving at an event. He was a force of nature approaching a destination, and the laws of physics, finance, and family were all on his side. He turned the final corner and saw it. The Sterling Tower. It was magnificent, a shard of glass and steel that pierced the night sky, its upper floors lit in a celebratory cascade of light. His building. From the outside, it bore the Thorn Consolidated logo, but that was just a nameplate on a house he owned. He felt a surge of pride, pure and clean. He had designed every line, every angle, every pane of glass. He had poured his soul into this structure, and it had become his salvation. He pulled into the long, circular driveway of the Grand Hotel where the gala was being held. A river of Blacktown cars and luxury sedans flowed toward the entrance. And then there he was, in his silver Aston Martin, parting the sea of modern, predictable luxury. He saw them immediately, standing on the red carpet near the entrance, bathed in the flash of cameras. Richard, looking regal and proud. Eleanor, his perfect accessory. Mark, preening in a tuxedo that was just a little too tight. And Chloe. She was stunning in her emerald dress, laughing at something Mark had said, the picture of effortless glamour. She looked happy. She looked like she hadn't a care in the world. She had no idea that her world was a stage and the curtain was about to fall. He took a deep breath, pulled the car to a perfect stop right at the front, and waited. The valet, a young man with wide eyes, approached his window, hesitating as if he were afraid to touch the car. Liam simply smiled and handed him the keys. It was time. The performance was about to begin. Liam's entrance was not an explosion, but a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. He bypassed the red carpet and the clamoring photographers, entering through a side door he knew would lead him directly to the mezzanine overlooking the main ballroom. He wanted to observe first, to take in the scene not as a participant, but as the architect of the entire evening. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns. 1,000 of the city's most powerful people gathered to celebrate Richard Thorne's crowning achievement. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and a string quartet played something elegant and forgettable in the corner. It was a perfect picture of success, a carefully constructed illusion. From his vantage point, he watched his wife and her family. They were holding court near the base of the grand staircase, the gravitational center of the room. Richard was pontificating, gesturing with a champagne flute, his audience of sycophants hanging on every word. Mark stood protectively close to Chloe, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. And Chloe, she was radiant, soaking in the attention, playing the part of the proud daughter and the desirable partner. She scanned the room with a proprietary air, as if it all belonged to her. In a way, she believed it did. Liam descended the staircase slowly, with no hurry. He moved with a quiet confidence that drew the eye. People he didn't know, powerful people, noticed him. Their eyes flickered over his perfectly tailored suit, his calm demeanor, and a silent question formed on their faces. Who is that? He was an unknown variable in a room where everyone was known. He accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter and positioned himself near a large marble column, content to watch the drama unfold. It didn't take long. A junior executive from Thorne Consolidated, a man who had often seen Liam hunched over a drafting table, did a double take. He nudged his companion, and they both stared, whispering. The ripple started, a slow wave of recognition and confusion moving through the lower ranks of the company attendees. Finally, Chloe saw him. Her brilliant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a flash of pure fury. She excused herself from her circle and began weaving her way through the crowd toward him, her movements sharp and angry. Mark followed a pace behind, his expression a mask of arrogant bemusement. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous, a stark contrast to her charming public persona. She kept a brittle smile plastered on her face for the benefit of anyone watching. "You said it was a company gala," Liam replied calmly, taking a sip of his water. "I work for the company. This is not a joke, Liam. I told you not to come. You are embarrassing me." Mark stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He looked Liam up and down, his gaze lingering on the expensive suit with a flicker of confusion before settling back into its usual sneer. "Listen, pal, I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, but you need to leave. This is a private event. You're out of your league. My league." Liam repeated the words softly, letting them hang in the air. He turned his gaze from Chloe to Mark. "Tell me, Mark, what league is that exactly?" Before Mark could answer, Richard Thorne arrived, his face a thundercloud. He had clearly been alerted by Chloe. He dispensed with any pretense of politeness. "Liam, out, now." His voice was a low growl of command, the voice of a man who was not used to being disobeyed. "Hello, Richard," Liam said, his tone infuriatingly pleasant. "Lovely party. The building is magnificent, isn't it?" Richard's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He grabbed Liam's arm, his fingers digging into the fine wool of the suit. "I will not have you making a scene and embarrassing my daughter. Security will escort you out if you don't leave this instant." Liam didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He simply looked down at the hand on his arm and then back up at Richard's face. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "You have 100 journalists in this room, and I imagine the headline, 'Richard Thorne forcibly ejects lead architect and primary financier from Sterling Tower Gala,' might be difficult to explain." The statement landed in the space between them. Simple, devastating, final. Richard froze, his hand still on Liam's arm. The words didn't compute. They were nonsensical, a foreign language. "What did you just say?" he stammered, his bluster evaporating, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. Chloe laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Lead architect? Don't be ridiculous, Liam. You draw floor plans for suburban dentists' offices. Have you been drinking?" "I've never been more sober in my life," Liam said, his eyes locked on his father-in-law. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a single, folded document. He held it out for Richard to see. It was the deed of ownership, the master document bearing not the name of a Swiss investment fund, but the registered holding company for Ethelred Designs, with Liam's name clearly printed as the sole director. Your company was 3 weeks from bankruptcy when the final financing for the tower was due. Your creditors were preparing to carve up your assets. You were saved by an anonymous investor who bought out the debt and took a controlling interest in the building itself. That investor was me. Richard stared at the paper, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. His entire body seemed to sag, the proud, powerful posture dissolving into that of an old, confused man. Mark snorted in disbelief. That's forged. That's insane. You're a nobody. You're a junior draftsman. I'm your boss. You were my boss, Liam corrected him gently. In a job I took to keep an eye on my investment and to understand just what kind of people I was dealing with. It was illuminating. He then looked at Chloe, and for the first time, she saw a stranger. The quiet, pliable man she had married was gone. In his place was someone cold, powerful, and utterly in control. As for being the lead architect, Liam continued, his voice now carrying slightly, drawing the attention of those nearby. I assume you've all heard of Ethelred Designs. A murmur went through the small crowd that had begun to gather. Of course they had. Ethelred was a legend, a phantom firm that had won every major design award for the last 2 years. Their work was brilliant, revolutionary. Richard Thorne had boasted for months about how he had managed to secure the mysterious firm for his legacy project. Liam let the name settle in the air. Then he delivered the final, quiet bomb. Ethelred is an old family name. My mother's side. I founded the firm 3 years ago. He looked directly at Richard, whose face had gone a ghastly, pale white. Welcome to my party, Richard. I'm so glad you could make it. The world tilted on its axis. For Richard, Chloe, and Mark, the ground simply fell away. Richard Thorne, the titan of industry, stood speechless, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. The deed in Liam's hand was an unassailable truth, a rock against which his reality had just been shattered. The building he had touted as his legacy, the monument to his name, was not his. He was merely a tenant in another man's triumph. Mark was the first to find his voice, a sputtering, incoherent mess of denial. No, that's impossible. You get my coffee. You fix the plotter when it jams. This is a lie. A sick joke. His voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. He was a man watching his entire understanding of the social order crumble before his eyes. The man he had belittled, the subordinate he had lorded his petty power over, was not just a superior, but a giant in the field he aspired to conquer. The humiliation was so profound it was almost a physical blow. Chloe was silent, but her reaction was the most dramatic. All the color drained from her face. Her perfectly constructed composure, her life's work, disintegrated in an instant. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from Liam's impassive face to the document he held, then to the soaring, magnificent ceiling of the ballroom. She wasn't just looking at a building anymore. She was looking at a 5-year monument to her own blindness, her own colossal misjudgment. Every insult she had ever hurled at him, every dismissive comment, every act of condescension, now replayed in her mind, recast in the horrifying light of this new reality. She hadn't been married to a failure. She had been married to a genius who was hiding in plain sight, and she had been too arrogant and shallow to see it. As if on cue, a new figure entered the tableau. A man with silver hair and an air of immense, unforced authority moved through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea. It was Arthur Sterling, a man whose name was synonymous with old money and global power. Richard's face, already pale, turned ashen. Arthur Sterling was one of the few men in the city whose power dwarfed his own. Sterling ignored Richard, Chloe, and Mark completely. He walked directly to Liam and clapped him warmly on the shoulder, a gesture of familiar camaraderie that stunned the onlookers. Liam, there you are. I was beginning to wonder if you were going to stay in the shadows all night. His voice boomed with genuine affection. The tower is even more magnificent in person than it was in your renderings. A true masterpiece. You've outdone yourself. He turned his gaze to Richard, and the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by an arctic chill. Richard, he said, his voice flat, I trust you've been properly introduced to the man who saved your company from being sold for parts. Richard flinched as if struck. He couldn't speak. The public confirmation from a man like Sterling was the final nail in the coffin of his denial. It was all true. Everyone was watching. The whispers were starting to spread through the ballroom like wildfire. The story was too shocking, too delicious to be contained. The junior draftsman, the secret genius, the arrogant father-in-law. It was the stuff of legend. Liam looked at Chloe. Her eyes were pleading now. The fury was gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified hope that this could somehow be undone. Liam, she whispered, her voice trembling. She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. Liam met her gaze, and his expression was not one of triumph or anger. It was one of profound, irrevocable finality. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stated a fact. You once told me, at your parents' Christmas party, that my passion wouldn't pay the bills. It seems you were mistaken. He then turned to Mark. You said tonight that I was out of my league. You were right. I am. He then addressed Richard, his voice clear and precise, carrying over the stunned silence of their immediate audience. The board of Thorn Consolidated will be dissolved tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Emergency meeting I have called as the majority stakeholder of its largest asset. A new board will be appointed. Your resignation will be expected on my desk by noon. He didn't say it as a threat. He said it as a simple scheduling note. With that, he turned his back on the three of them, the architects of his years of quiet humiliation. He placed the document back in his jacket pocket and took a step toward Arthur Sterling. Arthur, he said, his voice calm, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Would you care to join me for a tour of the penthouse? The view is spectacular. Sterling grinned. I'd be delighted, my boy. I'd be delighted. Together, the two men, the real power in the room, began to walk toward the private elevator, leaving Chloe, Richard, and Mark standing alone in the wreckage of their world, the flashbulbs of the photographers finally finding them, capturing their faces not in triumph, but in the stark, naked light of their utter and complete downfall. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of silent, controlled chaos. As Liam and Arthur Sterling ascended in the private glass elevator, the scene they left behind in the ballroom imploded. Richard Thorne, looking as though he had aged 20 years and 20 minutes, was quickly surrounded by his panicked senior executives, all demanding answers he didn't have. He stumbled away from them, his wife Eleanor finally rushing to his side, her face a mask of confusion and fear. She tried to guide him toward an exit, away from the hundreds of pairs of eyes that were now fixed on them, their gazes a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. The king had been dethroned in his own court, and the spectacle was riveting. Mark was adrift. His entire career had been built on his proximity to Richard Thorne. That proximity was now radioactive. Colleagues who had been laughing at his jokes an hour earlier now avoided his eyes, stepping away as if he were contagious. His bravado had shattered, leaving behind a twitching, terrified man. He looked at Chloe expecting what? Solidarity? An escape plan? But Chloe wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the closed doors of the elevator that had carried Liam away, her expression one of utter desolation. In that moment, Mark ceased to exist for her. He was just another casualty in the blast radius of Liam's revelation. Upstairs, in the magnificent penthouse suite that Liam had secretly designed as his own private city retreat, the noise of the party below faded to a distant murmur. The suite was a masterpiece of understated luxury, with panoramic views of the glittering city skyline. Liam walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the world he had just conquered. "Are you all right, son?" Arthur Sterling asked, pouring 2 glasses of what looked like very old, very expensive scotch from a crystal decanter on the bar. Liam took the glass Arthur offered. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. He took a sip, the fiery liquid a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of his emotions. "I don't feel victorious. I just feel quiet. The best victories are the quiet ones, Arthur said sagely. They're not about a single, noisy moment of triumph. They're about the lasting peace that comes from setting things right. You didn't do this for revenge, Liam. You did this for truth. You simply forced them to see what was already there. Liam nodded, accepting the wisdom in the older man's words. He had spent years building walls. The walls of his firm, the walls of his secret life, and the great glass walls of the tower that now surrounded him. He had built them to protect his dream. He hadn't realized until tonight that he had also been building his own cage. The quiet he felt was the sound of the door to that cage swinging open. Down below, Chloe finally broke from her paralysis. She fled, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares. She ran from the ballroom, out into the cool night air. She saw the car, Liam's car, the silver Aston Martin, still parked at the front, a gleaming testament to a man she had never known. The sight of it was another physical blow. It was her dream, the one she had shared with him in what felt like another lifetime, and he had achieved it without her. He had brought her dream to life only to use it to illuminate her nightmare. She hailed a taxi, her beautiful emerald dress now feeling like a costume from a play that had ended in tragedy, and sobbed all the way home to a house that she now suspected wasn't hers at all. The consequences began to unfold with the brutal efficiency of a corporate takeover. The following week was a blur of legal maneuvers and public relations disasters for the Thorne family. Just as Liam had stated, the emergency board meeting was held at 9 a.m., and Richard Thorne did not attend. His resignation, typed by a trembling assistant, was on Liam's new desk, Richard's old desk. By 10 a.m., the press release was concise and devastating. It announced a change in leadership at Thorne Consolidated and a restructuring of the Sterling Towers ownership, crediting the visionary design and financial salvation of the project to the hitherto anonymous firm Ethelred Designs and its founder, Liam Hale. His real surname, not the one he shared with Chloe. Mark was fired before lunch. His termination wasn't handled by Liam, who had more important things to do, but by the new head of human resources. It was a cold, impersonal email. His access to the building was revoked, and his personal effects were sent to him in a cardboard box. He vanished from the corporate world, a ghost of a career that had been built on a foundation of sand. The social fallout was equally swift and merciless. The Thornes were pariahs. Their friends stopped returning their calls. Invitations were rescinded. Their fall from grace was the main topic of gossip at every country club and charity luncheon in the city. Richard locked himself in his study, drinking heavily, a fallen monarch with no kingdom left to rule. Eleanor was left to manage the wreckage, fielding calls from lawyers and trying to hold together the fragile remnants of their social standing. A few days later, Chloe came to the house. Liam was there, packing a small bag. He had known she would come. He had been preparing for this conversation for years. She looked smaller, diminished without her usual armor of confidence. Her face was pale and tear-streaked. "Liam," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." "I agree," he said, continuing to fold a shirt with calm precision. I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I was a fool. I was blind. I had no idea. If you had just told me." Liam stopped what he was doing and finally looked at her. He felt a deep, weary sadness. "Told you what, Chloe? That I wasn't the failure you all decided I was? Why would I have done that? You were never interested in who I was. You were only ever interested in what you thought I wasn't. My perceived weakness made you feel strong. My supposed lack of ambition validated your own." He was not angry. His voice was level, almost clinical. He was using the moral mirror, forcing her to look at the unvarnished truth of her own behavior. "Let me be clear," he continued. "I didn't do this to punish you. Your punishment is realizing that you threw away something real for a cheap imitation." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the city. "You had a partner who loved you, who would have shared all of this with you, and you chose to humiliate him for the sake of a man like Mark and the approval of a man like your father. Those were your choices, and these are the consequences." Tears streamed down her face. "But we can fix this. I love you, Liam. I see that now. I can change. We can start over." It was the plea he had expected, the desperate attempt to reclaim the prize she had only just realized she'd lost. He walked over to the desk in the corner of the room and picked up a thick manila envelope. He handed it to her. Her name was typed on the front. "What is this?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she took it. "Those are divorce papers," he said, his voice gentle but unbreakable, "along with a full accounting of the assets. The house is yours. I've established a trust fund that will ensure you can live comfortably. I'm not a cruel man, Chloe. I'm just done." "No," she pleaded, shaking her head, the envelope forgotten in her hand. "No, you can't. After everything, you can't just leave." "I'm not leaving," Liam said, picking up his bag. "I'm just finally choosing to live in the world I built for myself. Instead of the one you tried to build for me." He walked past her toward the door. He didn't look back. The sound of her desperate, heartbroken sobs followed him down the hall, but it was a sound from a life that was no longer his. He closed the front door quietly behind him, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt truly, completely free. The resolution was not a single event, but a gradual settling of dust. Liam moved into the penthouse of the Sterling Tower, the magnificent space he had designed as the ultimate expression of his vision. From his windows, the city spread out below him, a living blueprint of future possibilities. He threw himself into his work, not as a refuge, but with a newfound passion. The secrecy of Ethelred Designs was shed like an old skin. The firm's identity was now public, and with a name and a face attached to the legend, the offers that poured in were bigger and more ambitious than ever before. He hired the best and brightest young architects, fostering a culture of collaboration and respect, the antithesis of the toxic, top-down arrogance he had witnessed at Thorne Consolidated. He was a different man, or rather, he was the same man finally allowed to occupy his own space. The quiet humility was still there, but it was now alloyed with an unshakable core of confidence. He was respected not just for his talent, but for his integrity. The story of his quiet rebellion at the Gala had become an urban legend in the business community, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimation. He insisted on a fair divorce settlement. Chloe, on the advice of her lawyers, accepted it without a fight. She had no grounds to contest it, and more importantly, she seemed to have no fight left in her. She kept the house, a cold monument to a life that had been a lie. She was financially secure, but socially and emotionally, she was bankrupt. Her friends, the ones who had flocked to her because of her father's power and status, had all but disappeared. She was left with nothing but time and regret, a hollow existence in a beautiful cage. The fate of her parents was a quiet tragedy. Richard Thorne was forced into a humiliating early retirement. He sold his remaining shares in the now restructured company for a fraction of their former worth. He and Eleanor retreated to their sprawling mansion, but the house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum for a dead legacy. The power couple of the city's social scene were now recluses. It was Eleanor who finally broke the suffocating silence. One evening, months after the gala, she found Richard in his study, staring blankly at a wall of awards and accolades that now meant nothing. She finally said the words that had been sitting unspoken between them for years. "You did this, Richard," she said, her voice devoid of its usual placating softness. "Your pride, your arrogance. You couldn't stand that a man like Liam, a quiet, decent man, was married to our daughter. You had to diminish him, to make him small, so you could feel big." Richard looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a broken man's fury. "He deceived us. He humiliated me." "No," Eleanor said, shaking her head with a sad finality. "He simply told the truth, and we were too proud to see it. We broke our daughter's marriage. We pushed away a man who was better than all of us. And for what? For appearances. Now look at us. We have nothing left but appearances." It was not the beginning of a reconciliation, but the beginning of an honest accounting, a painful first step on a long road toward understanding their own culpability. Liam, meanwhile, was building. He was designing a new public library, a free hospital wing, a sustainable housing project. He was using his wealth and his talent to create things that would last, things that would serve people. He found a quiet joy in the work, a satisfaction that was deeper and more real than any victory he could have claimed over the thorns. One afternoon, he was visiting the construction site of the new library. Standing on the scaffolding, looking at the city, he felt a sense of peace. He had not set out to destroy anyone. He had only set out to build. And in the end, that was what he had done. He had built a new life from the foundations of his own integrity. The drama, the confrontation, the revenge, it all felt like a distant storm that had passed, leaving the air clean and clear. He had proven his worth, not to them, but to himself. And that was the only validation that had ever truly mattered. Months bled into a year, and the new shape of Liam's life became solid, familiar. The penthouse was no longer just a space, but a home filled with books he'd actually read and art that spoke to him. The firm, Ethelred Designs, became a beacon of architectural innovation, known as much for its ethical practices as for its breathtaking structures. Liam Hale was no longer a mystery, but a respected name, a man who occasionally gave guest lectures at the university and sat on the board of several arts and culture charities. He was living the life he had earned, quietly and without fanfare. He rarely thought of the thorns. They existed now as a memory, a chapter of his life that was definitively closed. But sometimes a stray detail would bring them back. He'd see a woman in an emerald green dress and feel a fleeting echo of that night at the Gala. Or he'd drive past the neighborhood where he and Chloe had lived and feel a faint, ghostly sadness for the young man who had tried so hard to make that life work. It was not regret, but a kind of gentle melancholy, the scar tissue over a wound that had long since healed. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was having coffee at a small cafe near one of his project sites. He was sketching in a notebook, working out a design problem for a new concert hall, when he saw her. Chloe was walking on the other side of the street. He almost didn't recognize her. The polished, perfect shell was gone. She was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. Her hair wasn't perfectly styled. She looked normal and terribly lonely. She was looking in shop windows, but her gaze was distant, as if she wasn't really seeing what was in front of her. He watched her for a moment, unobserved. He felt no anger, no triumph. What he felt was a profound sense of pity. She was a woman untethered, a ship without a harbor, stripped of the status and identity that had been her entire world. He wondered if she had learned anything, if she had begun the difficult work of building a new self from the wreckage, a self based on something more substantial than her father's name or her husband's status. He hoped so. He considered walking across the street, saying hello, but what would be the point? They were strangers now, connected only by a shared history that was painful for them both. Acknowledging her would only reopen a door he had firmly closed. He let the moment pass. She continued down the street and turned a corner, disappearing from his view and, once again, from his life. He turned back to his notebook, to the clean lines and elegant angles of the concert hall. This was his world now, a world of creation, of purpose, of building things meant to bring beauty and joy to others. He had fought his battle, not with anger and aggression, but with patience, strategy, and an unshakable belief in his own worth. The lesson of it all was clear to him now. True strength wasn't about dominating others or projecting an image of power. It was about the quiet, relentless work of becoming the most authentic version of yourself, of building a life like one of his towers on a foundation of integrity, brick by patient brick. The world could dismiss you, underestimate you, and try to tear you down, but could never take away what you had built inside yourself. That was the only legacy that truly mattered. The quiet confidence he felt was not the arrogance of the thorns, but the deep, abiding peace of a man who knew exactly who he was, and who had finally, in every sense of the word, come home. Liam learned that respect isn't given. It's built, just like one of his towers, on a foundation of truth and character. It cannot be demanded or inherited. What do you think is the most important foundation for a relationship? Is it honesty, respect, or shared ambition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories about integrity winning the day and the quiet power of the underestimated, make sure to like this story and subscribe to the channel. We have many more blueprints for justice to share with you. We'll see you next time.